US-Iran tensions and the impact of these events on both the immediate region and also from a global perspective. I'm James Wood, I'm the Head of Security Solutions at International SOS, and I'm joined by two of our lead stakeholders overseeing our response to this situation. So Sally and Hany, if you could please introduce yourselves to this group.
Hello, I'm Sally Llewellyn. I'm the Regional Security Director for Europe, Middle East and Africa for International SOS.
And I'm Hany Bakr. I'm the Security Director for Aviation and Maritime for Mid-Air International SOS.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So the intent of this briefing is to provide you with our assessment of the current situation, our assessment for areas of potential escalation, and critically, the advice to how to build resilience on risks now and in the future. I should highlight that the exact situation can and probably will change. For our latest intelligence, you should refer to our most recent alerts or speak to one of our security experts around the world. So, what has brought us to this point? There has been long-standing geopolitical tension between the US and Iran, and it's been bubbling at a heightened level, arguably, since the US announced its withdrawal from the nuclear agreement in mid-2018. And then there's the reimposition of the sanctions. Since then, and particularly in the last 6 months, we've seen various low-level attacks and provocative rhetoric attributed to both sides and proxies. The US airstrike that killed General Soleimani represented a major departure from these somewhat restrained incidents. Retaliatory action from Iran followed with the targeting of US military facilities in Iraq, very much in line with what we would have expected as an initial response. The escalation has certainly heightened concerns over how these tensions could play out and the potential spillover effects, particularly in Iraq, but also for neighbouring countries in the Middle East. While President Trump's 8th January speech has left us cautiously optimistic that the acute post-Soleimani phase may be over, there remains underlying tensions and indeed the possibility of rapid escalation. We'd expect this geopolitical dynamic to be a major feature on the security risk landscape as we move through 2020 for our clients. So with that, I'm going to start looking at a bit about the assessment of the situation. So Sally, can you give us an assessment of the current situation where we stand right now?
Well, James, with regards to the Iranian retaliation, we'd say that it was carefully calibrated and certainly de-escalated in some way the tensions. But then the US President's announcement yesterday of additional sanctions against Iran could bring back into play some of the tensions that we've seen. As the Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif said that they had concluded their response to Soleimani's death, so we may have moved on from that acute phase, and now the next steps will be very much focused within the region in terms of coming up with a diplomatic solution to the challenge. So there'll be a lot of engagement with various allies on both sides to try and come to some kind of diplomatic accommodation to move on from the current tensions. In particular, we would expect the US to be working with Gulf states and with Israel to try and come to some kind of reconciliation. We would also expect that Iran to be looking at its potential economic partners in Europe and in Asia, where they have also been against US sanctions, to be looking for some kind of support to come up with a diplomatic resolution to the challenge.
Fantastic, thank you. And I suppose what we'll do now is go into a bit more detail. Let's take a look at sort of the impact of these events in the immediate region, working out from the epicenter. So we'll start with Iraq. And Sally, could you give us your take on the situation there, please?
Sure. So when we're looking at Iraq, specifically, we expect to see more ongoing attacks in Baghdad and in the central provinces. And that's because there's far more US military and diplomatic facilities in that part of the country. And we would see ongoing attacks against those facilities as being expected in the coming months. Looking more broadly at southern Iraq, where there's a lot of the key oil infrastructure and key commercial facilities, we would expect to see less attacks in that area. Given that the key focus for both Iraq and Iran will be to continue with oil production, to continue with economic stability on that front. So there could still be attacks in that area, particularly on US facilities or US personnel personnel or some US commercial interests, but they would be far less likely than perhaps in central Iraq, and perhaps we're looking at more incidental targeting of US nationals, particularly around protest activity and anti-US protest activity in particular. So more opportunistic targeting rather than direct targeting of US nationals in the south.
Thank you. And Hany, I'm going to pass over to yourself. We're going to start broadening this out. What's your take on the situation in the broader Arab Gulf region?
Well, James, the likelihood for any change of the security environment in the Gulf due to this incident is rather remote. However, that being said, the threat picture to various sites and installations within the Gulf that could be housing US air bases, or it could be the Strait of Hormuz, or key oil installations, remains prominent, and it's something that's certainly worth considering as a potential threat, given the history. Now, furthermore, although Iran possesses the capability to close down the Strait of Hormuz, the likelihood for that taking place is rather remote, again, due to the economical impact that this could have.
Fantastic. And Hany, again, looking at the corresponding impact out, what do you see as the major factors within the Levant right now?
So the Levant will continue to be a key region to watch due to the presence of various proxy groups that operate at different parts of the Levant with different interests and within the region. Eastern Syria, for example, represents a flashpoint where various groups operate with various interests. So it's certainly an area to watch. It's an area to consider during the current uprise. However, the likelihood for any of those proxy groups to take any action or any retaliatory action due to the current event between the two states is again remote.
And Hany, putting your aviation security hat on right now, what do you see as some of the impacts on the aviation security environment as a result of what we've seen?
Well, James, you'll recall on the 2nd of January, when the initial incident happened, where the US carried out an airstrike to targeting General Soleimani, that took place in the vicinity of Baghdad International Airport. That got the attention immediately of the aviation community, either operating over the Iraqi airspace or into Baghdad, which is an airport that houses numerous air carriers. And 3 or 4 days later, we've seen the retaliatory act by Iran, where they targeted a couple of two or three facilities, US air bases in Iraq. And that immediately got the attention again of the aviation community because of the missile strikes that have transited through the Iranian and the Iraqi airspace altogether. So immediately after those events, although the Iranian government indicated that they have taken action in retaliation for what happened, and we are seeing now de-escalation of tension. We have seen an immediate reservation by the aviation community and the air carriers, by a number of them starting to suspend flight operations into Iran and into Iraq equally, and numerous air carriers as well stopped overflying the Iranian and the Iraqi airspace because of the uncertainties surrounding the situations. Aviation communities do not like uncertainties. And we've also seen a number of aviation security regulators from different countries issuing flight restrictions or prohibitions for the air carriers not to fly over Iran or Iraq or fly into Iran or Iraq. So that again got the attention of the aviation community due to the risk of civil aviation. The world certainly does not want to see again an MH17 and do not want to see aeroplanes falling out of the skies due to the risk of miscalculations, of misidentification of aircraft. So, yes, it's something that the airlines are watching very carefully at the moment.
Thank you. Okay. And Sally, obviously we've looked at the immediate region. What is the potential for impact of this escalation in a global context?
I think it's interesting that it does actually have a global dynamic. As you say, we've talked very much about the Middle East, but we know that there's many proxies at work in other parts of the world and have been ongoing for a while. And there's certainly been a history of incidents related to this kind of geopolitical dynamic with these particular actors popping up in Latin America, Brazil, Paraguay, for example, in the Caucasus, in West Africa, and also in Southeast Asia. So it is a global issue, and as we see things play out over time, while the immediacy of the threat may be slightly diminished, these kinds of issues will pop up over time.
Okay. And Sally, now taking a step looking forward, what's the potential for further conflict, and what are international SOS doing to monitor indicators for this?
There is potential, of course, for this to continue to bubble along. It's been going on for quite some time over the last 18 months or so, and then we've seen this most recent sort of quite significant escalation in tensions. But this is the kind of issue that our teams are constantly monitoring 24/7 around the world. It's one of the primary responsibilities of the International SOS Security Team is to be monitoring issues that might impact our client base. So for this particular one, some of the things that our team are constantly looking at are the potential for further strikes on US military facilities in Iraq, for example, or attacks on Iranian interests in Iraq or elsewhere in the region. These kinds of things, if they pop up, are certainly some of the key triggers that we would watch for, as well as some of those other potential proxy activities in other parts of the world. So it's a key one that our teams will continue to monitor 24/7.
Okay, fantastic. And probably a question for both of you, but I'll start with Sally. With obviously these indicators we've identified, what are some of the recommendations that we have for organisations to manage this type of escalation?
I think you've touched on one of the key ones, James, and that's around sources of information and being clear on understanding exactly what's going on around the world and when things start to change or adjust, having some kind of reliable source of information to provide you with advice and guidance on how to handle those. There's so much that happens out in the media world. Sometimes it's difficult to cut through that and find out exactly what's going on and what should we do about it. So reliability of information is kind of the first thing that we support our clients with. Other recommendations we make are about no matter where you are operating in the world or wherever you have business travellers going to, it's important to have some kind of plan in place for how you would deal with an escalation in the security environment. And that plan is around travellers, as I mentioned, also expatriates and other families, non-essential staff that you may have operating in that particular country. So no matter where you are, it's important to have a plan. If things start to change, and we can see how dramatically and quickly they can, what is that plan? Who's going to enact it? What are some of the decisions and communication that needs to happen? And then importantly, what are some of the de-escalatory triggers as well? So we do recommend that planning be a really key element of how our clients deal with these kinds of issues.
Absolutely, and making sure those plans are relevant, updated, and if you've got existing plans that they've been reviewed as well to make sure they're still relevant for the situation.
Exactly.
And Hany, from an aviation perspective, what are some of the things that you would recommend organisations do?
Well, they're not too dissimilar to what Sally just described. They're literally an extension to what Sally just mentioned. So I would say a proactive security risk management in terms of security planning, in terms of aerospace assessments, to have a robust capability within each air carrier to carry out an aerospace assessment, to carry out an airport security assessment, to carry out an aviation-specific assessment, to understand the risks of the airspace that they operate over, to understand the risks of an airport of which they operate to, and to ensure they have access to instant and robust information to help aid their decision-making process and to help inform their security risk assessment. So a proactive security risk management is something that I would advise air carriers to seriously consider.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So very clear that it's about understanding and access to information. It's about making sure you've got that comprehensive risk management structure in place as well, escalation planning being a core part of that component as well. So Sally, Hany, thank you very much indeed for your time and for your guidance today. If you'd like to speak to an expert at International SOS about planning around these types of escalations, please do get in contact with us on that subject. With that, we'll end the session, and we wish you a very safe and secure year ahead.